Hello there, so today's video is all about the history of the cable cars, otherwise known as the Skyride at Alton Towers, so I hope you enjoy. Now, whilst the estate had already seen an increase in visitors after the Second World War, the 1960s saw two significant developments: the introduction of a fairground in the area where the world of David Walliams is today, and the cable cars, which opened in 1963. I'm sure these were a welcome introduction because we all know just how many steps you get in from a Towers day out, and in one of my last trips I did well over 30,000. The original cable cars were built by the British Ropeway Engineering Company, who also built many other systems at other UK locations and abroad. Some of their other UK work included some Butlin sites, including Skegness, Ayr, Minehead, Filey, and others, and even Drayton Manor. On the original cable car system, there were 16 open gondolas that sat 4 people each, and rides lasted 3 minutes. I also read that there were 14 in another source, but if we work on the basis that it was 16, in theory it had up to a 1,000 rider per hour capacity, and at any one time 56 passengers could be on the system. Gondolas were dispatched every 29 seconds, and on the line they were 240 feet apart. The gentle journey went at a speed of almost 5.7 miles an hour. Now, to look at the gondolas of the original system, they really were open. I'm sure they were safe, but they look very escapable if someone were to mess around, and you could have very easily lost something if you weren't holding onto it tightly enough. Hopefully not a small child, though. I couldn't find any information out on any accidents, so who knows if any did occur, but hopefully not. The route of the original system took guests from the courtyard near where Mutiny Bay is today, at a station whose site was where the Pirates Quest Arcade currently is. It travelled across an area formerly known as the Ingesta Centre, later known as Aqualand, going directly over the log flume, which would have made for some really great views of the splashes, over to a station near the gardens where the Prospect Tower was located. One of the interesting things about the Towers cable cars were that the views you got were not always completely open, like they were at many other locations where there may have been really nice seaside views, for example. At Towers there were, and still are, lots of trees to contend with. So some views were very tree heavy, but still good views nonetheless, and the cable cars held a dual purpose, such as providing much needed transport, whilst also being an enjoyable experience or ride themselves. I wonder if evacuations on an open gondola would have been easier, more difficult, or scarier maybe. The original cable car system closed in 1986, but that was not the end of the line, as it were. It was actually sold to Flamingo Land, who shortened it. It was time for the cable cars to be upgraded as they were becoming too popular, and with 4 riders per gondola, of which there were supposedly 16, this wasn't the best. The removal of the old system meant there was more room for development, such as Marauder's Mayhem, back then known as the Teacups, and the Aquarium. 1986 also saw the closure of the land trains known as Sunliner Express, which had only been in the park since 1984, possibly as a temporary replacement whilst the Skyride construction took place. Skyride construction started in 1985. In Festival Park, the area known as Dark Forest today, the Ferris wheel had to be relocated to accommodate the construction process. It was manufactured by Poma, but the company that carried out construction was called Sir Robert McAlpine, a civil engineering company that has been around since 1869 and still operates today. They also installed the monorail and the rapids at the park. The monorail opened in the same year as the cable cars, which was in 1987, and at the time, the monorail was the largest investment at the park, with the cable cars second largest. The Skyride was officially opened by Prince Edward and was initially sponsored by Kodak, the camera people. The new system had a much larger capacity, able to sit 12 people per gondola rather than 4, which were no longer open-sided, with the journey taking you 200 feet in the air. There were 52 gondolas rather than the original 16, and with the extra station, cable cars were now even more useful. So, the stations are near Tower Street, Forbidden Valley and Fountain Square, i.e. near Burger Kitchen. When it opened, the route between the Mutiny Bay area and the Gardens stations was slightly different to the original, so when passing over you would have seen to the side of the log flume rather than over the top. The site of the Forbidden Valley station, though, is the same site as the original station in that area. At the time, transport around the park was good, as you not only had the monorail before you got into the park or when you went home, but also the cable cars and the railway. I might do a separate video on the railway sometime, but from the mid-late 80s to the early mid-90s you really were spoilt for choice. According to Alton Towers, journeys between 2 consecutive stations take about 5 minutes, and you are welcome to stay on between Tower Street and Fountain Square and vice versa, not getting off at Forbidden Valley in between, but you're not allowed to stay on to complete a full round trip there and back. You cannot use Ride Access Pass, which they say is due to the high throughput and accessible queuing infrastructure, their words not mine, but the gondolas are accessible for wheelchairs and scooters, and service dogs are allowed. They also advise that the Skyride will not operate in high wind, low light or high temperatures. No mention of rain though. There is a maximum speed of 4 metres a second, which works out as just under 9 miles an hour. However, the average speed is just over 6 miles. Something that must be daunting as both a passenger and staff member are evacuations. As I mentioned earlier, you end up 200 feet in the air on the Skyride, and when you're surrounded by trees or the gardens, with the majority of the ride just running on a cable, this can't be the easiest thing to carry out. Whilst there are different methods out there depending on the circumstances and type of gondola or system, one way involves the rescuers climbing the support structures, using what look like giant carabiner clips to move themselves along the cable, before reaching the car and securing one guest at a time to some kind of harness or bag, before lowering them to the ground. I couldn't find out the specific procedures at Towers, so I'm unsure if they would do anything different. Now, I'm sure there have been numerous times over the years when guests have been stuck on the cable cars for a little while. In an article from 2004, there was an occasion where guests were stuck for more than an hour due to cables becoming caught and jamming, with the gondola apparently forming sparks and swaying from side to side, with guests rescued by being abseiled to the ground. And there have been a couple of fires. In 2007, this led to 50 firefighters being called to put out the blaze which destroyed the Forbidden Valley station roof, said to have been caused by a halogen lamp. Forbidden Valley was evacuated as a precaution and wouldn't reopen until everything was cleaned up and assessed as being safe. The incident happened at about 7:30 p.m. and guests were still in the park for Scarefest, as this happened in late October. The Skyride was closed for 6 months for repairs, reopening in 2008 midway through the season. For the 2009 season, the old gondolas were replaced by more modern, colourful versions which can sit up to 10 people. Unfortunately though, 2009 led to yet another fire in July, this time destroying the station in Fountain Square due to a faulty vending machine. It was yet again out of action, this time for the rest of the 2009 season, reopening again for 2010. Now for more recent history. In 2023, the Skyride did not open, somewhat unexpectedly, but it wasn't until August the park announced publicly that it would not be open for 2023 to allow for essential maintenance, including refurbishment of stations and signage. However, 2024 led to yet another year of closure, with much more work needed than initially expected. I tried to find out how much it cost, but all I could find is that it was a multi-million-pound investment. Due to reopen in 2025, the reopening date was pushed back little by little until eventually reopening on the 3rd of May. They even have their own pin badges, which look adorable. Let's keep our fingers crossed that there are no more fires and that the latest works will keep it running for a long time to come. And that's it. Thank you for watching/listening, and I'll see you next time.